your organization actually channels millions of dollars to various things, and people actually
Yeah.
want it to like bear fruit and bear results. And one of the frustrations so many Americans have right now is, hey, send money, and then the problem doesn't get any better, and then they're like, oh, the problem is not enough money. Send more money, and then you're like, I'm not quite sure that's actually going to do it. And I'm going to use an example that that I happen to know the numbers on. So let's say that your New York City schools, and you're spending $33,000 per student per year, on your school system, and the results aren't good. And then people look at it and be like, "Wait a minute, there are 30 kids in a classroom. It's $1 million. Like, how much is the teacher getting paid? Like, they're not getting paid, half a million or a quarter million. They're getting paid." So then
Right.
you start looking around, being like, "What's going on?" And then when someone says, "It's like, the problem, like, system needs more money," and then you're like, "Wait a minute, like, I'm not sure that's
Yeah.
right."
In my experience, and I think you'll agree with this, but tell me that the issue is rarely money and it's rarely ideas, because money is there if you have the political will to get it, and ideas are plentiful. Ideas, frankly, are cheap. It's executional capacity, right? And doing and aligning incentives. And when we don't have the capacity to execute on the dollars, or incentives are perverted, which is kind of gets again back to the basis of what we're trying to do with forward, then
Yeah.
you're not going to get good or efficient results. And so we spend a lot of time kind of focusing on the money, I think, because it's an easy or sexy ask. But thinking about incentives and implementation and maintenance is not nearly as sexy, and it's much more kind of technical and pedantic. But without that type of approach, we're not going to get good results in our public education. We're not going to get good results in our infrastructure, or in our political systems.
Oh yeah, you and I are attracted to trying to solve the root structural problems and
Yeah.
create value. I mean, you're an entrepreneur. You build things. I consider myself the same, and so you naturally are like, okay, like let's see what kind of problems we can solve, and there's no shortage of them. I mean, you've done so in a way that's influenced, at this point, probably like tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of lives, in New Orleans and beyond, like, in the region. I have been trying to do the same since I started Venture for America in 2011. So I guess I've been at it for 12 years. And it led me into the political realm because I started to realize that, number one, the biggest problems we have are unsolvable without a functioning government. You know what I mean? I
Right.
mean, like that.
Right.
There's like a whole series problems we can solve with commercial applications and companies that are going to make money. But then there's this whole suite of things that you kind of need the government to have its shit together.
Right. You kind of need government to fix immigration, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a
yeah,
fine example.
right.
Let's make a short list just for fun. I'm going to say you need government on immigration, AI, climate change, public
Infrastructure investment.
safety, education, homelessness, infrastructure. I'm up to seven or so.
And let me
Uh,
actually give you another one, which I think is a little bit more ephemeral, but I think is incredibly important, and that is national identity and trust in institutions. Because without that, we get kind of back to a Hobbesian jungle pretty quickly, right? And so you can't
no
touch
wonder
it.
you listened to that Peter Turchin interview, Michael, because he's like, "Oh shit, we're like approaching Hobbesian jungle territory, coming around the curve."
Yeah, so I think that's why the work of Forward and everybody who's involved in this space is so important, because everything points to us going through a period that's going to be politically and technologically disruptive. I mean, that's a fact, right? And so the question is, if we're going to come out the other side with a country that we are proud of and where our kids and grandkids can stay, then I think there's an imperative on those of us that are lucky enough to have the ability to do something to do it. Otherwise, it's a decade from now, and we might not. I might be in Denmark, you might be in Belize, and I think there's going to be a lot of sense of regret, because America is a young country. It's still an experiment, and it needs to still have people who are interested in propelling it and evolving it forward in a better way.
I want to dig into something you said half jokingly at the top, where you referenced working in a restaurant, which I totally agree with. And my first job was working as a busboy in a Chinese restaurant.
Yeah.
And people were taken aback by my perfect English because most of the employees of that restaurant, were getting bussed in from Chinatown.
Where are you from?
And, well, I went to school with their kids because it was my hometown. So a couple of busboy stories randomly. So number one, I was a busboy because my written Chinese wasn't good enough to translate orders to the kitchen, which they needed in written Chinese. So it's like, well, I can't take orders, so I guess you're busing. Number two, everyone else would get a bus from New York City's Chinatown to the restaurant and then leave at the end of the night. And then I would get in my parents' Honda Accord and just drive home individually. I'd be like, yeah, bye everybody. The three is that we would eat leftovers from the night, like as a late night dinner. Sometimes that food was not great because it was frankly the food that didn't make the table. So my go-to was white rice with doused in hot and sour soup with fried noodles on top. And I just eat that.
You were young and you were living your best life.
Yeah, there were good times. So you definitely do learn about service and people and money and just the basics.
Can I tell you the most important lesson that I learned from that, which really saves my hide on a daily basis here? It's a true story. So our first chef was a guy from Marseille, and he was a very talented chef, but he chain smoked Marlboro Red, so he'd killed his taste buds. And but he was and he was kind of a Marseille kind of sage poète de la rue. Anyway, there's this one night, and a woman gets the bouillabaisse, and she calls me over, and she says, I don't like my bouillabaisse, right? And so, I said, all right, well, I comp her the whole meal. It costs us whatever it costs us, and and they walk out and they proceed to go and just tear us apart on Yelp or whatever people were on, back then, Zagat's or whatever. And so, then the same kind of thing happened a few weeks later. And just for some reason, instead of just comping the meal, I went and I sat down with her, and I said, I'm really sorry about your bouillabaisse. And I said it with a straight face in .com San Francisco. I said, but tell me what's wrong with it. Tell me what you don't like about it so I can get some feedback back to the kitchen, and we'll try to do better next time. And she proceeded to talk about how there wasn't enough broth, and and the shellfish were inadequate, and the toast was soggy. And I gave her a glass of wine, and she proceeded, she after that became one of our best customers. And what I took from that is that people want to have their problem acknowledged and to be heard far more than they want that problem to actually be solved. So the worst thing that you can do is to ignore somebody when they're expressing distress about something. But if you go and say, tell me about your problem, you've then succeeded because you've heard them. And if you solve the problem, that's lagniappe. Then you're truly a hero. But so now in this job, when we get hit by stuff every day, my action almost every time is to go right to the source of the problem and say, I'm sorry, tell me what's going on. And it's just that is a restaurant lesson that I learned by comping a lot of meals.
Hey YouTube, glad you're enjoying the podcast. If you really like it, hit subscribe, and then YouTube will notify you every time we have a bang up new guest. Thank you.